So I'm here in South America to meet with the members of Iron Maiden, one of my all-time favorite bands, and is now actually one of the biggest bands on the planet. But the thing about Iron Maiden is that their roots lie in a movement called the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, which was this explosion of bands back in the early 80s in England. But what I've never really understood is what exactly was the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, and what's its contribution to the development of metal music. Filling stadiums in South America. Back in 1980, when they released their first record, they were considered the leaders of the new wave of British heavy metal, or Nawabum, as it's called. But Maiden actually got their start in the mid-70s. And what I've always wanted to know is, what was the musical climate like in England at that time? Why do you think it took that time to get to that point and release that first album?
I think it was just purely because of what was happening or not happening in our case at the music biz at the time. We were around before the punk thing, but then the punk thing happened sort of around '77. All the punk bands were getting the gigs, and anything that was remotely more mainstream rock wasn't even looked at anymore, you know. So it was really tough for bands at the time. I remember going down to a gig, you know, so in West London, and we went in there and it was just people just diving about all over the place, spitting over the band and all this. We just hated everything about it. Absolutely everything.
Maybe punk could be credited with at least bringing speed.
I'm sorry, can't credit it with anything.
Come on, no. Steve.
No, we hated it.
Don't believe
We absolutely hated it.
In 1977, punk was exploding in England, and it also happened to be the same year as the Queen's Silver Jubilee. And to take the piss, the Sex Pistols famously rented a boat on the Thames River. But why I'm interested in punk is because there's a lot of folklore around the animosity between metal and punk in the late 70s. So what I want to understand is, what exactly was the relationship between these two styles of music?
Just for you, here's a love song, and it makes time to say, it's been a lovely day, it's okay.
What was different about metal compared to punk in the late 70s?
Metal players they're metal riffs. We were much more kind of, almost, not bluesy, but sort of rock and roll, kind of traditional based in the way we viewed the notes we played. There was kind of a great kindred that we had with like the Stooges and the MC5. But the similarities really were only in volume.
Why ultimately were you attracted to going more the punk direction than the metal?
Because it was mine. It was my generation. It was what I wanted to do. And, you know, we didn't play as good as some of those guys either. I think we were grateful that we could get something out that sounded like a song.
Just for you, here's a love song, and it makes me try to say, it's been a lovely day and it's okay.
Were the metal and punk fans coexisting peacefully, or was there actual real conflict there?
It's a bit like two snarling dogs in a cage, you know. They'll look at each other, they'll size each other up, and then after a while they kind of back down and get used to each other being there, and then it's, oh, well, maybe his butt doesn't sniff so bad after all.
Mid-70s, when it kicked off, it was very much a them or us culture. You didn't mix, you didn't attempt to mix, and if you did mix, there could be trouble. I've had bottles thrown at me as I've walked past clubs, purely for the crime of wearing a denim jacket.
Being a rock guy yourself, how did you feel about punk?
I hated it. Yeah, I don't see the pleasure of spitting on people and things like that. It ruined proper music.
Metal musicians in England in the late 70s seemed to have a very different musical philosophy than their punk counterparts. But given that no album came directly on the heels of punk, I'm wondering if all metalers shared this perspective. So I'm meeting with Brian Tatler, guitarist for the influential no-album band Diamond Head, to get a deeper understanding of how heavy metalers felt about punk.
I liked punk. I thought it was very important for the music scene. I think it got rid of a lot of the deadwood. There seemed to be like prog bands were getting out of control, bands like Yes, making double albums and triple albums. You could only see these bands if you went to see them at Wembley. They were like gods from another planet or something. You didn't breathe the same air as Led Zeppelin. But suddenly you could go and watch a punk band in a club, and yeah, the excitement, the energy. I think it gave thousands of kids the idea that you go and make your own music, go and get a guitar. Instead of having this incredible benchmark of, say, Deep Purple to live up to, suddenly I could play the guitar like maybe Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols.
It appealed to kids. You know, kids want noise, you know, and they want power and they want whatever is the in thing, you know, and that's what was the in thing at the time.
Why were the media and the labels so infatuated with this thing called punk?
They want the next big thing, because this will make them money. So when something happens, and the Sex Pistols happen big time through their TV interview, everyone thinks, we'll have one of those. Not what's happening next, but we want one of those, we want one of those now.
The Vapors, turning Japanese. I got your picture.
People I talk to often talk about how the punk explosion was fairly short-lived. Is that fair?
Punk kind of died as soon as it went mainstream. Every little went out and bought a leather jacket and cut their hair and put safety pins through their cheeks. I think they got very focused on how to be successful. This is how they do it with, you know, pop acts. This is how it works in the mainstream. We just have to apply the same rules to our band.
These former anarchists, if you like, had become big label, million-selling artists. Out of punk, you kind of got the indie, jangly guitar, and to a certain extent, the new romantic movement as well. So there was a real kind of end point there, and it's like, right, okay, what's coming next, or what could we do next that's really going to rock?
By the end of the 70s, punk in England had gone mainstream, and it was no longer a defiant, underground music movement. So now that punk's authenticity was waning, how would the new wave of British heavy metal get its start? One of the biggest legends in the history of the new wave of British heavy metal is that its origins can be traced to a London venue called the Bandwagon, where DJ and hard rock enthusiast Neil Kay apparently kick-started the Nawabum movement.
What was the state of music at that point? I'm thinking 78, 79.
It was punk or nothing at the time. And these rock bands, these youngsters, some of them were only kids. They had nowhere to go, no one to move the product higher, no one to press it, print it, release it, and get it there. And it began to get me really annoyed. I'd always dreamed of a place, whilst working in the London clubs and going to like live gigs and things, that there should be rock available to the people. And you could turn everything round 180 degrees and throw everyone out that wore a tie and shirt and demand that jeans only were worn and only T-shirts. I had this massive sound system there. It wasn't a discotheque club system. It was a band PA, and it could blow windows out. What I kind of realized in the end was that I'd grown a whole culture of rock and roll loonies. I kept phoning up Sounds, which was the big metal rock paper of the time. In the end, Jeff Barton took notice. I said to him, if you come up, you will not be disappointed. I will show you something you have never seen before.
The concept of a rock club, you know, full of you know, long-haired oiks, you know, getting their rocks off to you know, the likes of Ted Nugent, was pretty much inconceivable circa 1978, 1979.
When we saw the results, it was astonishing. He'd put a centre-page double spread about us in Sounds. And Jeff came to me one day and said, would you be interested in doing a heavy metal chart for the paper every week?
He wasn't just playing your Rush and Judas Priest, but he would actually take a chance and throw all this new stuff into the mix, like Praying Mantis, like Iron Maiden.
We made a tape and we took it down to Neil Kay's sound house, mainly to try and get a gig, not for anything, any other reason really. We just wanted to get a gig there because we knew that it was a good place for our core fans, rock fans.
Steve said to me something like, do us a favour, mate, take it home and give it a listen, and if you like it, give us a ring.
And when you listen to the Maiden tape...
Went mad. Went absolutely berserk.
He started playing the tracks off the tape in his chart, and then all of a sudden, our tracks start going up the chart until, you get the #1, Prowler's #1 and all this stuff. Me and Paul actually went down there one night just to see what would happen, when they played one of our tracks. Of course, we weren't known then or anything like that, so we was just able to stand at the bar and watch what was going on. And the whole place just went crazy when the Maiden tracks come on.
Walking through the city, looking out. look pretty. I've just got to find my way. See the legs flashing. Wow, them legs and lashes. I've just got to find my way.
The Maiden tape was awe-inspiring. I don't know how else to put it. It was, well, here's a band waiting to smack the world. Of course, convincing the labels that was a different story.
As always, you'd aim for a record deal, a big record deal, and you heard of your EMIs and your CBSs. But indie labels came out around the time of punk rock. It'd never been heard of before. It gave it a different idea that you could make your own record and you might be able to get a distributor and you could sell it yourself or sell it at specialist record shops.
When Soundhouse tapes, well, I thought, we'll put it out because punk bands were putting out their own records. Steve actually did all the writing, logos and everything, and I called it Rock Hard Records, and it was a direct riff-off from Stiff. Stiff Records was, if it ain't stiff, it ain't worth a ours was, if it ain't rock hard, it ain't worth a, you know. So, yeah, we took stuff from punk, yeah.
Punk theme seemed to have established this DIY attitude. Do you think you were inspired by how the punk
We were
movement was
inspired
kinda
by
getting up
nothing, anything to do with punk. We just didn't want have anything to do with it at all.
And in terms of the sound of the band, to what extent were they coming from a punk tradition?
When you listen to a lot of punk stuff, it's quite weak, really. Whereas heavy metal has got a lot more power. They took the sort of punk thing but made it into heavy metal.
Youngsters coming up at around about that time would have thought, well, hey, yeah, I like rock, I like metal, but I can take the speed, because, of course, punk bands, all of a sudden, everything was quadrupled in speed.
We love things like Sex Pistols. We really liked that first album. It did definitely influence us. I think we just took all the naff things and threw them away and kept the good bits, punk, the prog rock, the Black Sabbath, the Led Zeppelin, the riff-orientated stuff. It all mixed together into like a melting pot and up popped really the new wave British heavy metal.
Here we go!
Bringing together the speed of punk with the heaviness of prog rock and classic metal, the new wave of British heavy metal introduced a whole new sound to rock music, and the movement was starting to build in London. But how did this movement become known as this thing called the new wave of British heavy metal?
I was invited by the manager of the Music Machine. How would you like to put on your own like 3-band show during the week? And I thought, yeah, what a shot. It's going to enable me to present to the industry in London new bands.
Jeff Barton from Sounds was sent along to review 3 bands, Iron Maiden, Angel Witch and Samson, and a big double-page spread about the bands. Alan Lewis, the editor at the time, added a subtitle, The New Wave of British Heavy Metal. And that was it. It was that simple.
Do you remember when you heard the term new wave of British heavy metal and what you thought of it?
Here we go. More, fluffy with spandex and Les Pauls.
Where were you in '79 when the gang began to burst? Did you check us out down at the local show? Were you wearing denim, wearing leather? Did you run down through the front? Did you queue for your tickets through the ice and snow?
Suddenly there was lots of bands all over the UK. Nobody was aware of each other before Sounds kind of tied it all together. We did a little 4-track cassette, sent it off to Sounds, and it appeared in Jeff Barton's playlist. That was such a result, you could do that. You send it off and it would, there it was. Jeff Barton liked it. Awesome.
If you looked at the marquee in 79 and 80, the punk bands had disappeared, and then there was the list of heavy metal, heavy rock bands, from Gary Moore right the way through to Tigers, right the way through to Raven.
People were fed up of just having the punk thing. Not everybody wanted, you know, quiff back hair and you know, and look like a pirate.
This was the logical next step to the bands like Deep Purple. All of us at one stage were thinking, what will happen next? And now we had the answer.
By the end of the 70s, the new wave of British heavy metal was established as a vibrant underground movement and was spreading to local scenes across England. But the movement had still not captured the attention of major labels. And then this all changed in 1980 when Iron Maiden released their seminal debut record, Iron Maiden.
Why do you think EMI wanted to sign the band? Did they see something in this band, or were you pushing this band on
Oh,
how did it work?
they saw one thing. That's packed venues. Going nuts.
They come down to the sound house and saw it was jammed back. They couldn't get in fact. They were stuck at the back. They couldn't see properly or anything like that. And I think whether they liked the music or not, they thought, bloody hell, what's going on here? We better sign these before someone else does.
It was full of people wearing red T-shirts with Iron Maiden on. And just to the right of the stage, Ozzy Osbourne was there. I remember seeing him, who looked at the time a little bit kind of worse for wear, but interested in it. Obviously kind of looking and thinking, new generation here.
What do you think you guys were doing that was different in those early years compared to the previous generation of metal, like the Sabbaths and the Zeppelins and the Purples?
I suppose it was, you know, the aggression in the music and playing a little faster maybe, but, you know, we wanted to incorporate a lot of the key things like twin guitars and melody and prog type of stuff as well, chime changes and stuff, but just with a more aggressive attitude.
It was so refreshing, it was so new. This was what I wanted. This was what I and so many people have been waiting for through those sort of punk years. This is what the likes of Judas Priest, AC/DC had been prepping us for. And then it came, bang, and it was such a great album.
Keep your distance, walk away, don't take it, baby. Don't you stray, don't fade away, watch your step, these are to get you come by me, don't you stray.
Another element that's key on that first record is, of course, that image of Eddie. Why did that image become so important?
It was very clear with the band we weren't going to get a sort of photograph of them looking real scary, you know, or looking real cool. I mean, Maiden's not a cool band. It's not a scary band. It's about music. We needed something, and, you know, the way Roger Dean did Yes, not with a single character, but they were looks. And I was more into getting a single character.
Eddie the Head was a skull on a plank of wood with a mouth that used to come smoke out. But I'll never forget that Rod wanted to call it John or something like that, or Jim, Bob, something like that. And we just sat there and we said, his name's Eddie. He went, why? He said, because it's an head. It's an Ed, so it's Eddie.
Fans were going through record shops, flicking through the album rack and whatever, and pull that out and go, oh, bloody hell, what's that? The Eddie on the front. Then they'd turn it over and see the live thing. Wow, and a lot of them said they bought the album without even really knowing what it was about, just because of the cover. So, you know, it definitely made an impact.
Look kind of punky, though. A little spiky hair.
Don't start.
I think it was really the first big record, you know, a top 10 album of this whole new sound. I guess it would be like the first massive Sabbath album or the first big Zeppelin album. Bit of a sigh of relief, I think, for a lot of fans. Hey, actually, you know, this is gonna work.
I don't know if any of you out there have got our album. Oh, good. This song is called Running Free.
Reading in 1980, you guys also played, and that seemed to be a pretty important step forward.
Obviously, a fantastic big festival that, you know, I'd been there in '73, you know, to see Genesis and loads of other bands and stuff, and, you know, so to actually play there was amazing, and the reaction we got was incredible.
It was a fantastic show for us, and I think that took us to another level, because you're playing to 30,000 people in one go.
What do you think the significance of the exposure at Reading is for the Nawabum movement?
There's probably a whole raft of people who were there for Whitesnake, who were there for UFO. And they're going to experience these new bands, so they probably aren't that bothered. They bought their ticket for the other things. And so, okay, this is pretty good. Yeah, this is Tigers of Pantang went down really well. Iron Maiden obviously went down extremely well. Def Leppard didn't get down particularly well, but that's because of the allegations of sellout that were leveled at them.
There's a big piece in the newspapers about them selling out, and it came on, and the reception was horrific. Bottles of pee, you know, in 2-liter bottles were being thrown up, hitting the stage, exploding over the band. Guys having dumps in paper and I mean, really, really bad.
Def Leppard's poor reception at Reading is one of the most notorious moments in the history of heavy metal, and their membership in the Nawabum movement has long sparked debate among metal fans. So I'm meeting with Def Leppard singer Joe Elliott to get his take on what exactly happened at Reading and how it impacted their early career.
So how did it feel to have that backlash? I mean, most famously, at Reading, you guys weren't received very well. I mean, was that...
I disagree with that, actually.
Yeah.
I absolutely disagree with that Reading thing. People go on and on and on about we didn't go down well at Reading. No, the reviews said we didn't go down well at Reading. Kids throw stuff when they're drunk. They pee in the bottles, screw the tops back on if you're lucky, and then they launch them at the stage because it's something fun to do. We got that, but so did everybody else, because I watched all the other bands getting it too. One guy writes it, and everybody says it's gospel. Well, I'm telling you now, it's I think that all came about because we had a song called Hello America, and they thought that we were that conniving. It's like we weren't even that clever. You know, that was just a vision of a kid sitting in a factory staring at 4 blank walls with no windows. I think I wrote the lyrics to Hello America in 1977. Didn't even have a passport.
Do you remember the first time you heard that term, the new wave of British heavy metal, what you thought of it?
The only thing I do remember is desperately trying not to be part of it. Hard rock covers a multitude of bands, from Van Halen to the Kinks. New wave of British heavy metal, for a start, it ties you into being British. In the mainstream press, heavy metal bands were just thought of as just stupid.
and I didn't want us to be part of that. I want us to be mentioned in the same breath as Zeppelin, the Who, the Kinks, the Stones, the Beatles, Pink Floyd. These were all the kind of bands that we'd seen the global success that they'd achieved, and that's what we were after.
By the early 80s, Def Leppard had disassociated themselves from Nawabum and embarked on their quest for success in America. So now that Leppard were no longer part of the movement, what would be the next step in the evolution of the new wave of British heavy metal?
And at 19, here on Top of the Pops, we invite you to run for the hills with the sound of Iron Maiden.
White man came across the sea. He brought us pain and misery.
With the release of Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast in 1982, the new wave of British heavy metal started to crack the mainstream. And it was Maiden's new lead singer, Bruce Dickinson, that helped propel the movement towards mass popularity. So I'm meeting with Bruce to ask him why he joined Maiden and what his vocal approach added to the sound of the band.
In '81, you played Reading with Sam's.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Steve and Rod saw you perform at that show.
Well, they went there specifically to see me perform.
So, yeah, why do you think that was a significant moment?
It's when I got the job.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I had to wait 3 months before they fired Paul, and in the meantime, I did some singing, and they had to go through a difficult time. They'd been unfaithful, and they were waiting for their infidelity, you know, they were waiting till they could have their moment, and, you know, it's a terrible thing to say, but, it's true.
I think Paul's voice suited the first album. He struggled with the second album, but if the band was going to break it in America, they're going to need a singer that's going to compete with Ronnie James Dio, Robert Plant, Dave Lee Roth, all the guys with the high range vocal. If you listen to any heavy rock, heavy metal band, David Coverdale, any vocalist, they need to get up there.
Paul had a very kind of guttural voice, and it had a style and a charm which was unique. How far it could go was, you know, was questionable. I think Steve was questioning that. You know, he wanted a voice that could do a lot with a bigger range.
Bruce's vocal range was, you know, way different from Paul's, and so we were able just to throw pretty much anything at him, really, and we did.
A key moment when this new wave of British heavy metal has reached a peak, a time?
I suppose maybe the peak might have been Iron Maiden's releasing Number of the Beast and it becoming like #1 album, and then appearing on things like Top of the Pops. You know, it's kind of mainstream then, and it's getting played on Radio 1 and things like that. And most of the other bands can only aspire to that.
There's some bands that you could hear 1,000 of the greatest bands in the world, and it'll never be magical to you. First time I heard Iron Maiden, you know, it's like hearing music for the first time, like you'd never heard anything, like it didn't exist.
Steve Harris's right hand, that is the essence of heavy metal to me. I'm not even joking. Steve Harris is metal. When I see Steve Harris, it just makes me want to kill people.
They became the classic heavy metal band, but for the new generation. I think you could always measure a band's success by the size of their light show.
Number of the Beast sold over 14 million copies worldwide, solidifying Iron Maiden as the undisputed frontrunners of the new wave of British heavy metal and one of the biggest metal bands on the planet. And in the wake of Maiden's success, an army of Nawabum fans from across England and Europe began to emerge.
One thing that characterizes Nawabum that hadn't really happened before with the attitude of the fans, at least, identifying as being, okay, now we are a metal tribe.
I think that was one of the big differences between our style of music and the punk say. I think, you know, you locked onto a band or maybe 2 or 3 bands, and that was your band, you know, and that's who you followed. And you wore their colours on your back.
You had your denim jacket or your vest, and all your favourite bands were embroidered on the back. And your mother wouldn't do it, so you had to learn to sew. All the heavy metal fans were great with a needle and thread.
We weren't in big silvery capes playing drums out of a giant clam. We were just there, that was it. You know, denim and leather. Or spandex, sadly.
Probably for the first time ever, we could punch our fists in the air and shout about it and be proud to be wearing denim and leather and celebrating heavy metal. Heavy metal was almost becoming fashionable.
With the new wave of British heavy metal fan base firmly established, many of Britain's old guard of hard rock were inspired by the movement, creating some of the most memorable music of their careers. So why did these older bands catch a spark from Nawabum?
It fires you up. It gets you into like a fighting spirit, and you play harder and stronger. You just feel satisfied and maybe a sense of relief that it's not just us. You know, we're all, this is great. Look at this band. There's Maiden, there's Motorhead. You're able to check each other out and be inspired and to some extent influenced about where we're all going together as bands within the heavy metal scene.
Do you think these older bands were getting a bit of inspiration?
From the newer bands?
Yeah.
Possibly. Yeah, possibly. I mean, we'd be inspired by Judas Priest. Sure. But, like you say, maybe they listened to the newer bands as well and thought, you know, we'll have some of that. Because it's fast, the kids like it. There was a tour, wasn't it, with Judas Priest and Iron Maiden supporting? That was a big British tour, that was. So there might have been a bit of, you know, checking out each other, see what's happening.
The bands that we were supposed to wipe away, your priests and your UFOs and whoever else, actually became bigger because of us than ever before. I mean, I remember Gary Moore turned up to one of our gigs at the Marquee and got up and played on stage with us because they wanted to be seen with whoever was coming up.
Through those early 80s, some of those bands, established bands, came back with some of their greatest ever albums since their debuts. Whitesnake's Ready and Willing, AC/DC's Back in Black, Heaven and Hell came at that time, Judas Priest. All these bands, all of a sudden, they're getting more fans because there's things happening in the Nawabum that are bringing record buyers in, and at the same time, I think they're raising their game.
I think it's fair to say that the new wave of British heavy metal, including Priest, which is part of the old wave, we all came together, and that was just like the dynamite going off. Bang, we're here, let's go. we're going to grow. This is now going to be a worldwide event, and it was.
Was completely wasted, out of work and down. All inside, it's so frustrating as the dream town.
With the legends of British hard rock now joining forces with the new wave of British heavy metal, the movement had reached its summit. But as the 80s progressed, Nawabum would face a new American competitor for the leadership of the heavy metal genre. So how would Nawabum adapt as the 80s wore on?
Breaking the law, breaking the law, breaking the law. Out on the streets, that's where we'll meet. You make the night, I always cross the lines. Tighten our belts, abuse the cells, get in our way, we'll put you on your shelf.
With the launch of MTV in the early 80s, audiences around the world were introduced to a whole new style of heavy metal, glam metal. Emerging from LA's Sunset Strip, glam metal caused a major shift in the look and style of metal. I've always wanted to know how the Nawabum bands were affected by the glam metal explosion.
This is new, it's exciting in the same way as Nawabum was new and exciting 2 or 3 years back. They're talking about places that are weird and wonderful. It's a sunshine environment and all this. This is different. This is very different to industrial British music.
Things are very fickle here. Things change really quickly. It's only a small country. When the invasion came from America, I think Van Halen started it, though. Van Halen were massive long before Motley Crue, Poison, or Rat. People were prepared for it, so I suppose we let it in quite easily, really.
When these American acts came over and MTV came, a pair of jeans and a leather jacket just wasn't what they wanted, you know. They wanted the guys with the big fluffy hair and the spandex pants and the Motley Crues of the world and the Poisons and the whatever else fit right in there.
It became not about music, it became about, you know, getting your on TV. We didn't do love songs or ballads, and we sure as hell weren't going to pose around with low semi-naked tarts.
She talk, body talk, pictures I can see. She talk, body talk. She talk, body talk, music I can see. She talk, body talk.
Did you feel a sense of pressure to fit into that mold of
there
that
was
American look
with
and that
that
American
thing
sound?
there? Yeah, I mean, it was like put makeup on. Why? Makes your eyes look bigger from a distance. You can look more like that. Fine. Yeah. And it wasn't just us, it was everyone. You look at pictures of Ozzy, he looks like Shelley Winters.
A lot of bands did try to sound American. A lot of bands, a lot of the later bands on Neat Records, for example, would try a keyboard-driven sound with the harmonies, with the softer, more radio-friendly approach.
The first words out of the producer's mouth when I walked in to do the Wildcat album was, "Can you do harmonies?" I'm like, what? Harmonies? We're an English metal band, you know, we don't do harmonies.
For a band that had been over here all this time, to try and rustle up some harmonies and go for a glossier production was quite alien. I think Leopard did it because they were over there and they were absorbing the influences, they were absorbing the sound.
One British heavy metal band who flourished in the MTV world was Def Leppard. Their 1983 album, Pyromania, hit #2 on Billboard and went 10 times platinum in the US. So I've come to Southern California to meet with Def Leppard guitarist Phil Collen to get his insight into why Leppard were able to crack America.
You have to charge it up normally. I think it'll have a mild glow to it.
Awesome. Would you play like a trademark Leopard riff for us? Something off Pyromania, something old school? Was it that melody in Leopard's music that you think basically set you apart from Nawabum, or were there other things too?
Well, I think taking a shower was a lot different. The guys in Def Leppard took showers, and it was cleaner. It was clean cut. Most of the guys in that were all leather jackets, greasy hair, and it was like, whoa, and very working class, although Def Leppard was that as well, but it was more song-orientated and melodies and stuff like that. I don't think Def Leppard got a fair shot, actually, in them earlier days, and everyone says, you guys are lame and all this stuff, and it wasn't. They were just trying to do something a bit different.
I remember Pyromania, I played it so many times. It was cassette. Couldn't read the song titles anymore, you know, because you'd worn it down so heavily. Why was that record such a success, thinking musically?
It was AC/DC meets Queen, you know, and it's funny because a lot of the time, you know, people stay in one camp. They go, oh, I want to be like AC/DC, or I want to be like Queen. Mutt Lange's whole thing was, let's make a rock version of Thriller where it crosses over.
It was so brilliantly produced that daytime pop radio would play it, even though it was hard rock. It didn't offend. If it was going to offend anybody, it would have been offending the hard rock fraternity.
And I talked to people who were in bands down in London. Oh, we heard the demos for Pyromania. It sucks. It was horrible. It's all the producer. It's all the producer. Hey, I'm sure they're crying all the way at the bank.
Going full circle to the whole Nawabum thing, you'd fully transcended that by this point.
We left it far behind us, and at that time it was great because we were finally a standalone band. We were just this British invasion part 2. There hadn't really been a band from England break America since those heady days of the Stones and the Beatles and the Who and Zeppelin. There hadn't really been any rock bands sell records in America. Not to the amount that we were selling.
I wanna touch
While Def Leppard was conquering America and Iron Maiden was touring the world, most Nawabum bands didn't survive the glam metal invasion, and by the mid-'80s, the movement went into sharp decline. But then something happened. A band emerged from America that would continue the legacy of Nawabum. That band was Metallica.
Metallica started out as a cover band, and the bands that we were covering obviously became a significant influence. We didn't tell people they were our songs, but we didn't tell people they weren't our songs. We just, here's a song called Am I Evil. We left out the, by a band from Diamond Head calling that somehow got edited out. And then we played Am I Evil, and then everybody was having fun, and it was all good.
Yes, I am. Sing it, man. Yes, I am.
As we started writing, our kind of was derived out of those songs. It was Diamond Head, Motorhead, it was certainly some Maiden, certainly some Judas Priest, and, you know, certainly, you know, that was the stuff that kind of fueled us.
This next generation of young thrash musicians, why were they inspired by what you guys were doing?
I can only think the speed. You know, Lars came to see Diamond Head. That's probably what he wanted Metallica to be. We want to be as fast as Diamond Head. We want to be as, you know, write these long songs and be exciting and good musicians, but not just, you know, not just do the doomy stuff that Sabbath has already conquered. That's their territory already. So there's a new territory here where everything's a lot faster and a lot more exciting.
This is the point where you go from small bands doing their own thing, few get signed, your Maidens, Leopards, and then from there on in, you hit America, you hit Metallica, bang. From that moment on, you got thrash metal, black metal, doom metal. It all happens. And that's why I think this is a critical point in musical history.
I'm here in South America to meet with the members of Iron Maiden, one of my all-time favorite bands, and is now actually one of the biggest bands on the planet. But the thing about Iron Maiden is that their roots lie in a movement called the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, which was this explosion of bands back in the early 80s in England. But what I've never really understood is what exactly was the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, and what's its contribution to the development of metal music. Filling stadiums in South America, back in 1980, when they released their first record, they were considered the leaders of the new wave of British heavy metal, or Nawabum, as it's called. But Maiden actually got their start in the mid-70s. And what I've always wanted to know is, what was the musical climate like in England at that time? Why do you think it took that time to get to that point and release that first album?
I think it was just purely because of what was happening or not happening in our case at the music biz at the time. We were around before the punk thing, but then the punk thing happened sort of around '77. All the punk bands were getting the gigs, and anything that was remotely more mainstream rock wasn't even looked at anymore, you know. So it was really tough for bands at the time. I remember going down to a gig, you know, somewhere in West London, and we went in there and it was just people just diving about all over the place, spitting over the band and all this. We just hated everything about it. Absolutely everything.
Maybe punk could be credited with at least bringing speed.
I'm sorry, can't credit it with anything.
Come on,
No.
Steve.
No, we hated it.
Don't believe
We absolutely hated it.
In 1977, punk was exploding in England, and it also happened to be the same year as the Queen's Silver Jubilee. And to take the piss, the Sex Pistols famously rented a boat on the Thames River. But why I'm interested in punk is because there's a lot of folklore around the animosity between metal and punk in the late 70s. So what I want to understand is, what exactly was the relationship between these two styles of music?
Just for you, here's a love song, and it makes time to say, it's been a lovely day, it's
okay. What was different about metal compared to punk in the late 70s?
Metal players they're metal riffs. We were much more kind of, almost, not bluesy, but sort of rock and roll, kind of traditional based in the way we viewed the notes we played. There was kind of a great kindred that we had with like the Stooges and the MC5. But the similarities really were only in volume.
Why ultimately were you attracted to going more the punk direction than the metal?
Because it was mine. It was my generation. It was what I wanted to do. And, you know, we didn't play as good as some of those guys either. I think we were grateful that we could get something out that sounded like a song.
Just for you, here's a love song, and it makes time to say, it's been a lovely day, and it's okay.
Were the metal and punk fans coexisting peacefully, or was there actual real conflict there?
It's a bit like two snarling dogs in a cage, you know. They'll look at each other, they'll size each other up, and then after a while they kind of back down and get used to each other being there, and then it's, oh, well, maybe his butt doesn't sniff so bad after all.
Mid-70s, when it kicked off, it was very much a them or us culture. You didn't mix. You didn't attempt to mix. And if you did mix, there could be trouble. I've had bottles thrown at me as I've walked past clubs, purely for the crime of wearing a denim jacket.
Being a rock guy yourself, how did you feel about punk?
I hated it. Yeah, I don't see the pleasure of spitting on people and things like that. It ruined proper music.
Metal musicians in England in the late 70s seemed to have a very different musical philosophy than their punk counterparts. But given that Nawabum came directly on the heels of punk, I'm wondering if all metalers shared this perspective. So I'm meeting with Brian Tatler, guitarist for the influential Nawabum band Diamond Head, to get a deeper understanding of how heavy metalers felt about punk.
I liked punk. I thought it was very important for the music scene. I think it got rid of a lot of the deadwood. There seemed to be like prog bands were getting out of control, bands like Yes, making double albums and triple albums. You could only see these bands if you went to see them at Wembley. They were like gods from another planet or something. You didn't breathe the same air as Led Zeppelin. But suddenly you could go and watch a punk band in a club, and yeah, the excitement, the energy. I think it gave thousands of kids the idea that you go and make your own music, go and get a guitar. Instead of having this incredible benchmark of, say, Deep Purple to live up to, suddenly I could play the guitar like maybe Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols.
It appealed to kids. You know, kids want noise, you know, and they want power and they want whatever is the in thing, you know, and that's what was the in thing at the time.
Why were the media and the labels so infatuated with this thing called punk?
They want the next big thing, because this will make them money. So when something happens, and the Sex Pistols happen big time through their TV interview, everyone thinks, we'll have one of those. Not what's happening next, but we want one of those, we want one of those now.
The Vapors, turning Japanese.
I got your picture. People I talk to often talk about how the punk explosion was fairly short-lived. Is that fair?
Punk kind of died as soon as it went mainstream. Every little went out and bought a leather jacket and cut their hair and put safety pins through their cheeks. I think they got very focused on how to be successful. This is how they do it with, you know, pop acts. This is how it works in the mainstream. We just have to apply the same rules to our band.
These former anarchists, if you like, had become big label